My name is Luciana O'Flaherty and I'm the editor for Oxford World's Classics at Oxford University Press. And I'd like to welcome you all here for this virtual discussion of our new Oxford Shakespeare. Oxford World's Classics, as I hope you know, are a series of over 700 books, which aim to provide the best authenticated texts with the most helpful introductions to new and returning readers. Within the series, we published the 37 or so Shakespeare plays and poems, and these new Oxford Shakespeare mark a generational shift. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event to re-establish and republish Shakespeare, and these books will be the guide for a whole generation of readers and playgoers. It's a truly landmark event to say we have a new Oxford Shakespeare. And guiding the books in this discussion, we are so lucky to have Professor Emma Smith, who is Professor of Shakespeare Studies at Hertford College at the University of Oxford, and the author of many fantastic best-selling books, including Portable Magic and Shakespeare's First Folio, 4 Centuries of an Iconic Book. And Emma is also a prolific podcaster, host of radio shows, and writer of many things, journalism among other things. And Emma has assembled a team of fantastic editors, 3 of whom we are lucky to have here with us this evening. And I'll introduce them in no particular order. So we have with us Todd Borlick, who is Professor of Shakespeare Studies and Renaissance Literature at the University of Huddersfield. And he's about to return to a post in the United States. His most recent book is Shakespeare Beyond the Green World, and he is currently co-editing the Oxford Handbook of Shakespeare and the Natural World. Lauren Working is lecturer in early modern studies at the University of York. Her work focuses on the impact of the Americas and its people on Tudor and Stuart politics, and her book on this topic, The Making of an Imperial Polity, Civility and America in the Jacobean Metropolis, is available as an open access text. Callan Davies is lecturer in 17th century literature and culture at the University of Southampton. His latest book is What is a Playhouse? And his current research concerns the Curtain Playhouse in Shoreditch, which is being turned into the Museum of Shakespeare. So I'll hand over to Emma and her editors to talk more about Shakespeare. And at the end, we will have time for questions. So please do send them in as you go in the Q&A panel. So if you type into the Q&A panel on our right, we should be able to see those questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Luciana. Thanks so much, everyone, for being with us. We are really excited about this launch of the Oxford World's Classics, and I think we're all really honoured to be in these really lovely books. For many academics, for all of us, I think it's great for us to work on something that will be sold in an ordinary bookshop at a price that an ordinary person might be able to afford, which is not always the case in academic publishing. And that we've had the opportunity to write introductions to these lovely new texts. I should say before we go any further, we haven't done the textual work to establish these texts. That's been done by our colleagues on the new Oxford Shakespeare, a team headed by Gary Taylor, Terry Boris, John Jowett and Gabriel Egan. And as I talk to each of the introducers, that's a slightly awkward word, about their edition, I'll mention the name of the colleague who actually edited that text too. Credit where credit's due. We all have been building on this fantastic editorial work. And what I'm going to do is ask each of the panelists to just give us a pitch about their play, and then we're going to go into a little bit more detail in some short conversations about what they've done that's new, what most surprised them about it. And as you may know, this evening we've got 4 plays on the table, and the rest of the more than 38, you'll have to wait and see what all the titles are, have now been commissioned. So this is a series which is we're inaugurating tonight, but which is going to keep coming out over the next 3 to 4 years. So you've got plenty of time to fill your bookshelves in this kind of higher purchase kind of way, a subscription model. Brilliant. So let's start by asking you just about the play that you have edited. I'm going to take the privilege of being the chair and being the general editor. I picked for myself Macbeth, and I have loved thinking again about this extraordinary thriller of a play. It's a super short play by Shakespearean standards. It's all about speed and consequence, and I have greatly enjoyed thinking about it right now, I suppose, in the context of politics, tyranny, attitudes to government, and so on, and also kind of about Scotland. I think Macbeth didn't seem very Scottish for a long time, and certainly in the productions that I've most enjoyed over the last few years, Scottishness and Scotland has come back a bit. Todd, can I ask you about your play? Tell us what it is and give us just a flavour of it.
Sure. So I had the privilege of writing the introduction, of being an introducer for As You Like It. This is Shakespeare's great pastoral rom-com. It's one of Shakespeare's most beloved, probably one of his most quintessential plays, because it has so many elements that people not only like about Shakespeare, but love about Shakespeare. It has the cross-dressing heroine. It has an escape to the greenwood. It has a melancholic philosopher who foreshadows Hamlet. It has a clown who combines some of the humor of Falstaff with the whip-smart satire of Lear's Fool. It has 5 songs. It has a wrestling match. It has, in the 7 Ages of Man speech, one of the most profound meditations on the human condition. And it probably has the greatest female lead in all of Shakespeare. So yeah, it's got a lot going for it, As You Like It.
Slam dunk, brilliant. And I should have said, having said I would say, As You Like It was edited for the New Oxford Shakespeare by Francis X. Connor. Thanks, Francis, for that work. Callan, next over to you.
Well, I suppose, so I'm introducing the Merry Wives of Windsor. And I think in some senses, it's quite similar to some of the things that Todd just mentioned there about As You Like It, but it's also the flip opposite of it. It's perhaps regarded by some over the years as the least Shakespearean kind of comedy that we have with us. And I think that is what I find quite exciting about it, and sort of spending time with it and taking us back to the theatrical world that produced a play like Merry Wives of Windsor, and sort of seeing how someone like Shakespeare creates his version of a Marvel dramatic universe in kind of borrowing characters from other plays and seeing what happens when you put them in a very different and homely situation.
Fantastic, thanks. And Callan's play Merry Wives was edited by Sarah Neville. Lauren.
Thanks. So I've got The Tempest. And this is really a play for any of us who have ever experienced something so seismic or so shattering that we wondered if it was even real. And it also contains one of Shakespeare's most poignant rallying cries against oppression. So for me, it was really exciting to think about how multivocal the play is, that servants and masters, women and men, humans and non-humans, the colonizer and the dispossessed, all of them have a voice in the play as its characters attempt to make sense of the world and all its strangeness and wonder. And that repetition of strange and wonder that comes up again and again in the play, and really trying to make sense of what that means for different characters. It really feels like a play that is an experiment for Shakespeare. You know, it's an unnamed island, and there's all these pressures and anxieties and fears put on its characters. It feels quite kind of psychological in that sense. And so thinking about, that multivocality was really rewarding for me.
Brilliant. And Lauren's Tempest was edited by Rory Loughnane for the New Oxford Shakespeare. I think that gives us a sense what's on the table. Lauren, I think I'm going to stick with you, and now I'm sort of interested to explore a bit what you think is compelling about this play right now? I think sometimes people wonder, what would be the difference between the Tempest that we've just brought out in 2024 and one that they might have had 30 or 40 years ago, or even a sort of old version, on the bookshelf from long ago? What actually changes? And so could you tell us a bit about what you think, how the Tempest looks different in 2024 than at previous times?
Yeah, that was a big challenge for me, and I'm sure for all of us, kind of, in the words of one of my students, they were like, oh, people have been writing about the Tempest for 400 years. I mean, what are you going to say about it that's kind of new or interesting that people haven't thought about before? So that was something that was really a challenge from the beginning. I think for me, one of the things that I wanted to do, I mean, Todd, you just said you had one of the kind of best heroines in your play. The Tempest is not a play that you go to for kind of strong, spunky, sassy women. And so one aspect for me of thinking about the play was trying to put women back into it, trying to kind of put my historical hat on and my kind of literary scholar hat on and think about what we can do with the story of women in this. We have a single female character who has any lines. That's Prospero's daughter, Miranda. We have Claribel, Alonso's daughter, whose marriage to an African prince sets the whole plot in motion, but who's only really mentioned briefly. And Sycorax, Caliban's North African mother, who's dead, but whose presence haunts a lot of the play. And Prospero and Sycorax both kind of, or Prospero and Caliban kind of both really draw on Sycorax, on the memory of Sycorax in the play. And so, yeah, I guess one way for me to approach it was to think about the context of the play's first two performances, and to think about the presence of women in the room, what they might have thought about, what these first kind of women who viewed this play might have, how they might have responded to it. And I can say a little bit more about female spectatorship in the context of 1611 and 1613 if that's of interest. But I was also
it's
really
all of interest. Yeah, but can I just ask you one thing? Sorry, I'm just breaking in to ask you because it's all of interest actually. But I just wanted to just press you a little bit on two things you said there, which might seem as if they pull in slightly different directions. One being, even as we can hear you describing these marginal figures, when you describe Sycorax as a North African witch, or you remind us that Claribel's married to an African prince, those are sort of almost throwaways, or 20 years, even 10, these would have not seemed as prominent, would they? And they do now seem prominent in our world. And then on the other hand, you're talking about some really specific, wonderful historical work in your introduction, which I really learned so much from, about those early performances. And I wonder how you found putting those two methods, if you like, together. One seems maybe they're not as opposite as I think. Do they feel opposite?
Well, I think, and this goes back to kind of what I tried to bring that was new. I think one way of, we've seen them as opposite in some ways because in some ways, Black and Indigenous scholarship hasn't perhaps made as much of a dent in our field as we might hope that it should have by the 21st century. And so an important aspect for me was like, if this play is about colonialism, or potentially a radically anti-colonial play, and if post-colonial scholars have definitely recognized, the way that writers from historically colonized countries have written about the Tempest, where are the women, and where are kind of contemporary Black and Indigenous women activists and writers in this historiographical story of the play and its interpretation? So yeah, it was kind of, I thought there was a way to reconcile it, but part of it was just kind of, so I bring in kind of contemporary artworks by Black feminist women who have explored the seemingly kind of chaotic force of Sycorax, and how that gives us a model outside of Prospero's vision of humanism to understand the play. But I did also kind of want to consider how gentlemen at the time might have thought about Sycorax. And this is where a little bit more of the historical digging came in handy. So a manuscript that I mentioned that I came across at the British Library when I was doing this research is a kind of commonplace book, which is compiled by a 17th century person, we don't know who, a gentleman who kind of brought this kind of disparate material together. And he copies out songs from the Tempest. But then there's also this widely circulated, kind of quite icky poem that's called In Praise of a Black Woman, which sounds like it would be quite a positive poem, but it's actually a very kind of sexually explicit story or imagining of a man kind of soliciting sex from this sycorax who has dark features. And so I kind of wanted to use that commonplace book and the fact that these, that Sycorax and the Tempest is kind of brought in with discussions of women and kind of white sexual desire to think about how the play was experienced in a literary culture where gendered comparisons around kind of darkness and witchcraft was increasingly common. And the poem mentions the Strait of Magellan, the kind of circumnavigation of the globe. So yeah, there were all these different things kind of swirling together. And I think that there are kind of ways of tying them in all together as well.
Yeah, no, I think I really recommend Lauren's introduction. The reason I wanted her to do this work was because of her extraordinary research on the New World's impact on Jacobean society, which, historiographically everybody has said, it was just kind of out there and it didn't really matter. And Lauren's completely turned that upside down. And it's great to see her bringing the Tempest into that much wider context. It's a really fantastic introduction, and I'm so proud actually that the World's Classics have produced it. It really is a new Tempest. I'm going to move along because I'm conscious I've got the time very much ticking. Although, as we know, Todd, there's no clock in the forest, is there? Tell us a bit about producing as you like it. I mean, in a way, Luciana's potted bio for you again makes it clear why you were my go-to man for As You Like It. But tell us a bit about that and your experience of working on it in the 2024.
Sure. Yeah, gladly, Emma. So one of the things I foreground in this edition is really the importance of Jacques' voice. Often he's been seen as sort of ridiculous figure, as someone who's sullen and alienated, and that Shakespeare's taking a rather cynical view of this cynical character. But because of where we are in 2024, where the world is, one of the ways I try to breathe life into the play is seeing its pastoral setting as an attempt to understand humanity's niche in the natural world. And Jacques appears as a spokesperson for a more environmentally conscious understanding of the universe, right? We could use the phrase ecological, but I prefer to say label like proto-ecological. His lament for the wounded stag, for instance, an act that's described in Act 2, Scene 1, seems to be a prophetic plea for a very poignant plea for animal rights and a moving denunciation of the ecological tyranny of humans and their kind of callous disregard for other species. So reading through some of the criticism on the play, I would come across phrases like, nobody suffers in As You Like It, or there are no deaths in As You Like It. And I think if you ask the wounded stag, I think we get a very different answer to that question. So I try to interrogate the forest setting of the play, this image of this sort of old oak forest that we associate with these kind of romantic Victorian pictures and productions of the play, and to situate it in a world that is already in 1599 experiencing a lot of ecological degradation. Deforestation is a major problem. There is a timber crisis in the late 16th century. England is running out of wood. So for Shakespeare to set this play in a forest that's also being encroached upon by pasture, It's arguable, actually, how many scenes in the Forest of Arden take place in the shade of trees. It seems that the majority of them are actually in pastures, because that's literally what's happening in Warwickshire in Shakespeare's
So that's
life.
a cash. Is that right, Todd? Am I right that that's sheep farming? That's a big sort of cash crop. I mean, sheep farming seems very pastoral to us in a sort of literary sense, but I think what you bring out is that in the ecosystem of Shakespeare's Warwickshire pasture, the pasture for sheep, because of the price of wool, is an absolute ecological nightmare.
Yeah,
Is that right?
That's right. And Thomas More is famously writing about this in his Utopia, so it's happening even in the early 16th century, but it's really kind of reached crisis proportions by Shakespeare's lifetime when As You Like It's produced. So yes, so the pastoral, while we think of it as a kind of a celebration of nature, insofar as it's glorifying this sheep farming economy, it has a real ecological toll as well.
I think that's a really striking thing about what you have done with As You Like It, and sort of politicizing in the best possible way the green world, which was introduced to Shakespeare scholarship as a kind of really apolitical kind of concept, really. But I guess the pastoral has always had a foot in politics, hasn't it? It's one of those genres that looks like an escape from the world and is also deeply invested in the world. So, some police car is going past my Oxford office. Sorry about that. How did you feel that what you had done moved As You Like It studies on?
Well, as I said, really foregrounding the forest setting and that tension between the forest and the Feldon, or the open pasture, as really a critical development in the plot, and something that Rosalind and Celia are participating in. Right, when they buy the farm, they could buy into this wool, the wool-based economy that is leading to the habitat loss, which is also leading to the loss of the sheep. And there's also the overhunting of the Duke, right? So the Duke is kind of this jovial Robin Hood figure who sees the forest as this egalitarian place, and is his opening speech in Act 2, which shifts the play into the Forest of Arden. Has a lot of tensions in it, right? On the one hand, it's this rhapsody that's full of all this incredibly lyrical, alliterative language that declares that ultimately there's good in everything. So it's a kind of view of nature as this book that's open to the human mind, that we can read freely and take, and also that this storehouse that we can take from. And Jake Weiss quickly points out kind of the hypocrisy of idealizing nature in our poetry, in our literature, but then in reality, the grubby reality of actually exploiting it, and the need to live off it, resulting in us failing to live up to those exalted ideals.
I was just to say, that just feels so prescient as you put it that way. Yeah. And Jake, please, sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, so I guess one of the speculations that I make in the introduction is that Jake Weiss' name contains an onomastic pun. So often people have associated the name Jake Weiss with Jake's and thought that he's literally full of crap, that Shakespeare's chosen this name as a kind of warning label, that not to take him seriously. But I've suggested that there's a bilingual pun on the Latin Jacques to lie down, because Elizabethan melancholics were often portrayed lying down on the ground, being closer to the natural world. And that phrase would have been familiar to early modern people from this use on tombstones and the inscription "Hic jacet," here lies. So recovering that pun in Jake Weiss' name forces us to take him a little bit more seriously. Maybe he's not so full of crap as people have believed.
Yeah, brilliant, fantastic. And was there anything that was surprising to you as you worked on it? What was the thing that was there a light bulb moment?
Well, a few things. First off, we're going back and rereading Lodge's Rosalind, which I hadn't read since graduate school. Just how much Shakespeare loved this book. He not only is taking plot points from it, but he is constantly echoing phrases, he's swiping phrases from Lodge, who was, part of that generation of Elizabethan writers who had this phenomenal education and this rhetorical training and could write with such fluency and grace. So Shakespeare's really enamored, not just with the story of As You Like It, but also with Lodge's writing. And something else that surprised me, I'd forgotten about, in the original version, the Oliver character, the evil older brother, is named Saladin. And the father is a ex-crusader. So just thinking about, why did Shakespeare change the name from Saladin, right? Why did he feel uncomfortable with that name? And if you think about the plot of the play, it's a younger brother in Lodge's version who's trying to recuperate his inheritance from Saladin, and is from this crusading family. So there's a kind of cryptic allegory buried in Shakespeare's source, where we can see the brother's quest to reclaim his inheritance as paralleling the Christian quest to reclaim the Holy Land. That struck me as something that needs to be considered more in the scholarship. So that's another idea I throw out in the intro.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fascinating, and it really contextualized the fact that in Rosalind they all have a big battle at the end, don't they? It's none of Shakespeare's, oh, he was coming, but then he met a holy man and he's converted and he's not coming after all, and it's all fine. I think they just have a really big, bloody sort of Crusader style set to at the end of the story.
Orlando murders a dozen people. He poleaxes some through the skull. So yeah, his Shakespeare realized his romantic lead.
It's funny how we've just got that bit of, and we've just got that bit of him wrestling now. That's sort of all that's left of it in Shakespeare's the unlikely wrestling. Brilliant, Todd. And it's great to hear you talk about it, because I can really see how this introduction is draws on and comes out of work you've been doing on rethinking nature writing, proto-ecology in this period. It's a really brilliant frame for As You Like It. Thanks so much for doing it. Callan, I'm going to ask you about some of the same kind of area about Merry Wives, and you already sort of suggested that when you spoke at the start, saying, this is a play which has had maybe quite a checkered history. It's not often one everyone says, this is my most favorite play. Tell us about framing that for new readers in the 21st century. How was that?
Yeah, it's and it's having quite a year at the moment, so it feels quite an apt moment to have been thinking and be thinking about Merry Wives. There are several productions on in the UK at the moment, and I think it was all equally perhaps not a play that I always thought through when I was thinking about Shakespeare. But having thought about it in depth for this edition, I've kind of come full circle to really being an advocate for Merry Wives. And part of the reason why is as I mentioned at the start, I think it does kind of buck the trends or the expectations that people tend to bring to I'm going to see a Shakespearean comedy. It does do some of that stuff, but for instance, marriage has already happened. It necessitates the whole function of the play. This is a play about two married housewives who are essentially trying to stop a kind of unwanted sexual advance from one of the greatest, sort of unwanted sexual advances in Shakespeare, in Falstaff. And are trying to deal with that with a kind of ingenuity, but also a real wit. And I think they might be up there with rivaling something like As You Like It in the way that as two female protagonists, they take control of the play. They're both extremely kind of literarily witty, but they're also in control and pulling all of the strings for the plot itself. So, again, the play has come to be known as the Merry Wives of Windsor, and it's one of the few plays that are just about named just after women in Shakespeare's canon. And this seems to me quite an important and telling thing about what then happens in the play. And in terms of how that translates to thinking about it today, even on a very practical level, it offers major roles to older women actors to sort of, to be the main stars of the play. But it's also really invested. Another thing that marks it out as slightly different from other Shakespearean comedy and indeed other plays are, for instance, its insistence on prose as being the greatest kind of comic medium in the world of Windsor. These are not people who are speaking predominantly in iambic pentameter. And there's a kind of, I feel like there's a bit of a kind of iffiness or an ickiness around kind of the way Shakespeare is taught and kind of consumed about what happens when a character moves into prose, that it's some sort of signal that, now what they're saying is trivial or silly or perhaps ignorant. But actually the play really gets its energy and its force and its comic effervescence from everyday language and slang, both from the main characters, but also from the many, many other characters in the play. So I think these kind of things really speak to us today. Yeah, thinking about what happens inside and outside the house, which is what maybe Wives of Windsor is concerned about.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to hear you talk about that, because obviously I wanted you for Merry Wives of Windsor because of the work on the Middling Sort project and the work you've done on domestic life, really fantastic work at the University of Kent. And how did that work find its way into what you were writing about Merry Wives?
Well, I think I was really, I guess as with all these introductions, you're kind of building on a rising tide of criticism and thinking and research, both related to and sort of indirectly related to the plays in question. And I think it's quite a nice moment to kind of take stock of the wonderful research that has been done on everyday life in general, sort of to be very broad about it, in Shakespeare's England. And this means not just people like Shakespeare or indeed what happens around the court, but people like Shakespeare is showing us in this play. So somebody who's running a tavern in a provincial town or a place outside of London, somebody who's discontent in their marriage perhaps and has greater economic ambitions than their husband might let them fulfill. So it was a real joy to kind of bring these strands together. And I think what I most enjoyed kind of building into this introduction, coming out of that, is a bit like Lauren was saying about the kind of polyvocality or the multivocality, as you put it. And building in some of the original voices, so the real life people who are the inspiration, I guess, for the Shakespearean characters. And Merry Wives, I think, uniquely brings us close to those people. It's the one play that isn't markedly set in a place distinct from Shakespeare's own time and place. It's actually it advertises itself as a kind of contemporary play for Shakespeare and his audience, as much as for us today. And so I wanted to kind of showcase some of those voices, much like Lauren was saying, particularly sort of women's voices, and their verbal dexterity and cleverness, and perhaps push back against some of the assumptions that people bring to lower status or non-elite individuals, and particularly non-elite women in early modern England. To hear what they have to say, really, because they are also as theatrically exciting, even though they're just going about their daily business and we have these snippets of their recordings. And for me, those kind of insights and hearing somewhat miraculously these preserved bits of ordinary people's voices allows us to understand a bit more about why Merry Wives of Windsor was compelling then and why it speaks to us today as a kind of, insistently topical play, which it seems to often be kind of understood as by directors and productions.
Yeah, one of the things your introduction made me realise is that one of the ways that Merry Wives, or what the downplaying of Merry Wives or the downgrading of Merry Wives in Shakespeare's canon has historically drawn on, is all kinds of really horrid hierarchies. I mean, about older women, about women in particular, about prose, as you say, about the contemporary world, about a play which doesn't seem to have an obvious source and so can't show Shakespeare's learning, and a sort of snootiness really about the middling sort, or the however we would sort of identify those people in Windsor. And what your introduction made me see is that those prejudices, in a way, have really played into the place of the play. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that there are lots of, it's having a moment, and there's a, if you're in the UK or visiting the UK, there's a really brilliant production on at the Royal Shakespeare Company over this summer, with a very good essay in the programme by one Callan Davis talking about the play. Do you feel it's a play which has sort of been better in performance than on the page? Is that part of its history?
I think that's definitely part of its critical interpretation. Perhaps it's no coincidence that at the moment that Shakespeare starts to be revered as a kind of literary playwright, a kind of symbol of this is what poetry should sound like, that kind of romantic projection that gets put onto him over the kind of 18th century. That's at the moment at which Merry Wives perhaps starts to be regarded with a little more snobbishness, as you say, by kind of some of these writers who are going to it and not finding great poetic statements of philosophy, although arguably there are those in there. And so alongside that kind of more literary distaste or changing of fortunes, you have a kind of persistent theatrical record of the play. So it never seems that when audiences actually get to go and see it live in the flesh, it's obviously doing something for them. And I think, I mean, Merry Wives is a play that is balanced between this wonderful verbal kind of written stuff and the license it gives actors and directors and producers to do amazing physical comedy, to do stuff with the set, to transpose it into one's own or a kind of very familiar territory. And really, yeah, and just kind of give license to the company. And you can really see that, I think, with what the RSC have done with it in Blanche McIntyre's production at the moment. Yeah.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Yeah, it's a great introduction, and as you say, to a sort of a timely seeming play. Now, no one's asking me about Macbeth, but I'm just going to talk about it for a couple of minutes anyway. But we're just about coming to the time when we've got a bit of time for questions. So if you're thinking about those, post those in so we can cover as many as we can in our hour. And it's great hearing you talk about what you did, because I realise one of the ways this series is of its moment is that there is a certain combination we've all got of critical methods, which has partly a historical element, but sort of trying to work with that rather than seeing the historical moment as the answer to the play or the key to unlock it somehow. We're all seeing the play in a historical context, which enables us to do something in the present. I was very interested in a couple of elements of Macbeth, partly, I think, building on some other work that I was doing, which I thought would be very far from this play, but which was on Shakespearean plots for narrative video games and the kind of R&D on immersive gaming, which you'll be surprised to hear I didn't know anything about really, but I've learned a huge amount about it, and I think it's a very exciting narrative form for in the present. It's a very complex narrative form in the present, and I came to think about Macbeth as its own sort of weirdly immersive drama. We always put the play to the gunpowder plot in some way, and I do think that that's important, that echo. But I also came to feel, and I don't have any real evidence for this, but that this feels like an indoor play to me. It feels like a very claustrophobic play, where you're almost boxed in with this crazy man, this crazy soldier, this sort of mad, determined couple for whom it's all falling apart, and you can't get away. It's like the opposite of a promenade performance where you can't promenade away. You're really sort of locked in with them. And so I thought a lot about the immersive elements of the play as being something very distinctive about this drama. And it touches on things like whether productions bring on the ghost of Banquo, for instance. It's quite clear in the first folio that Banquo's ghost does enter in that scene where only Macbeth can see him, remember, and he just goes completely crazy in front of everybody else. But we, the audience, can see Banquo. So we're there, we're there with Macbeth. We don't get that moment of stepping away from it. And I also thought about the very, very opening, which is the stage direction. You'll remember this play starts with the witches, when shall we three meet again? But it actually starts with a stage direction, which is thunder and lightning. And I was thinking about the theatre. I was thinking about a time actually before amplified sound when thunder, which seems to have been done with either sheets of metal or sort of massive ball bearings being rolled around in the theatre. This must have been a hugely loud noise up close, you know, really. And I talked a bit to a medic friend of mine about the sort of adrenaline response to an unexpected noise. It must have been, if you're in the theatre just sort of chatting and waiting for a play, and then it's thunder and lightning, you jump out of your skin, don't you? And Dave, this medic told me that, you know, adrenaline lasts for probably about an hour in the play. And I looked through Macbeth, and about an hour later, it's thunder and lightning again. It's as if we keep being brought up to this kind of queasy participation. So it was a great thrill to have a chance to write about Macbeth, which is a play I've been fascinated by since I did my O-level with Mrs. Hadley. I don't know. I would doubt Mrs. Hadley is on this webinar, but if she is, thank you. This one is for you. We should also mention that there are 3 other texts in this first batch. Emma Whipday's Measure for Measure, Indira Ghosh's Henry IV Part 1, and Hannah August's Romeo and Juliet. We thought it would be too distracting, although fantastic to have had everybody here. And Hannah is also in New Zealand, which would have made it more difficult. And one last thing I'm going to just say about the series as a whole, and then we'll open up to questions. You've heard from Lauren and Todd and Callan about the work and the excitement and the new work that's gone into these introductions, and we really hope that they open up aspects of the play either for new readers or for people who already feel they know these plays or they've studied them in the past. We really hope this will open up some new avenues for you. But we've also tried to produce books which are not absolutely overburdened with notes and commentary. If you want more notes and commentary, the New Oxford Shakespeare, which underlies these editions, has got it in spades, and you're directed to that in every volume of the world's classics. But these are lighter books. There's much more Shakespeare text on the page than there is notes. The notes are intended to gloss words that are unfamiliar and to help with understanding. They don't tell you, you know, this was first used in 1503 by a, you know, shoemaker, whatever. They don't give you, I don't know where I'm going with that, but they don't give you that. If you're interested in that, I'm afraid these aren't the editions for you. What they do give, though, is quite a clean, clear access to the text. And we really want to encourage people drawing on the introductions, but looking at these beautiful new texts, just have a pop at it. It's not overwhelming when you look at the work. You don't have that feeling, oh, I will never understand all of this, that sometimes the most brilliant full dress editions can just instill in you is a terrible sense of inadequacy, isn't it? I will never know all this stuff that a different edition can tell me, and so why would I even bother? So it's been really brilliant just to touch on these 3 texts, and we are ready, Kezi and Becky, who are in the background, to take up any questions if you would like us to do that.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It's been a really, really interesting conversation. So we have an audience question here. I'm very new to reading and trying to understand Shakespeare. Do you have any suggestions on how best to understand the story of the plays in his writings? And maybe to kind of broaden that a little bit, are there any kind of secondary materials that you think could kind of supplement people's introductions to these Shakespeare plays?
That's a brilliant question, and it's absolutely fantastic to have you on this webinar. If you're starting out, that's just great. I think that means a lot to all of us, to encourage you to take the next steps there. I'll start off and give the others a chance to think about things they would want to add. I think the first thing to say is you don't need to understand all of it. I don't think anybody ever did, myself, but that's perhaps for another conversation. what you're trying to do is get the gist, get a sense of how the play is moving on. I would definitely read a synopsis before you start. I don't think many people read Shakespeare with a sense of, "Ooh, I wonder what's going to happen." I mean, in a way, that's not really what's so brilliant about his works. It's about how we get there and how it's expressed and the kind of ambiguities of that. So yeah, read a synopsis. And have a look at, I mean, there's a huge number of kind of podcasts and coverage that you can find online, which I would really encourage you to browse through. So that would be my starting point. Feel more confident. You don't allow yourself to be made unconfident by the sense that this is all very difficult, because there are layers and pathways through which are absolutely available to you. Do any of my fellow panelists want to add into that? Does anybody have a favourite? I think we are allowed. We're probably in a self-denying ordinance saying we mustn't mention anything that is not an Oxford World's Classic, but I think we can as scholars and teachers. So if there's a book or a website or something that you recommend, does anybody have one?
Yeah, I would say to watch a few films. That can be a great portal into Shakespeare. I came of age in the 90s where there was this Shakespearean film boom that was just incredible. And I think seeing actors embody the language is really, gives a great boost to your comprehension of the poetry. It's when it's acted out, it suddenly just comes alive. So if you're struggling, just plod through the dense vocabulary, some of the archaic words on the text, supplementing that by watching some performances can be a really big help. There's also this book by someone called Emma Smith called "This Is Shakespeare," which
it's brilliant. I've heard about that. It's brilliant. Absolutely.
Yeah, I should read it as well, Emma. Yeah. Emma's got loads of amazing resources that are a great place to start, I think.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, look at those. Look at the free ones. We're not trying to sell other people's books. Only the world's classics today. So look at the free ones. Google me. But I am not the wife of the Mormon prophet. So that don't be taken down. Don't be taken down that. Many people have gone down that line, and there's no connection with Shakespeare. Have we got any other questions? We can't see the questions, so we're waiting with bated breath.
We do. Kind of on a similar note, what is the best performance you've seen of your own or any Shakespeare play?
Ooh, we're probably all going to not quite be able to do best, but so I'll just do the caveat for us all that this was an interesting one, or this is one that's in our minds right now. I saw Yale Farber's Macbeth a couple of years ago with Saoirse Ronan as Lady Macbeth, and I thought it was brilliant, slow, poetic, suggestive, didn't go down any of the cliches about the witches. There are many cliches about Macbeth's witches, the sort of warty, Halloweeny ones, but then we've got a great number of children witches now. That's become a great thing. We all know how creepy children are, especially if they're all dressed in the same outfit. Somehow that's very, very creepy. But it sort of avoided all of those, rather sort of solemn witchcraft sense of the world, beautifully set. So I completely loved that, and I watched it in the theatre more or less at the same time as I watched Joel Cohen's Apple TV film of Macbeth, which you can get on Apple TV still, with Frances McDormand and my mind's gone blank about the Macbeth. But that too is a very expressionist, beautiful black and white film version. Obviously, the Yale Farber Theatre can't have been in black and white, but in my mind, it rather was. over to you. What about you, Callan?
It's funny you say about the children witches in Macbeth, because my go-to for that answer is when probably it must have been one of the first serious productions I'd seen. My dad very kindly sort of drove me up to see Michael Boyd's Macbeth at the RSC. This was years ago. I don't know what year this would have been, but I was quite young. And I was just totally amazed by the spectacle of that production. I don't know if anyone else here would have caught that, but it began with all of these very, very creepy childlike dolls being hanged from the stage at the beginning, and it kind of built up at this, as you say, it's quite a short play, as you were saying, Emma, and it really had this frenetic pace, and these fireworks went off at one point all over the playhouse. And sort of some 15 years later, I became obsessed with the stage direction in a non-Shakespearean play that says fireworks all over the house. And I think, actually these two things are all related. So I found that on a special effects front, absolutely exhilarating. Yeah.
Lauren, do you have something you wanted to put
Well,
in here?
yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of productions I've actually seen, I think it was something like way back in 2011, I saw Ralph Fiennes as Prospero in Newcastle, and I never really thought that I liked The Tempest that much. And then I kind of saw that performance, and I still have this vision of him kind of at the very end when Prospero steps up and speaks to the audience. You kind of collapse that divide between the audience and the character. And it was, the kind of atmosphere was so kind of haunting and arresting that really stuck with me. There's a 2016 Royal Shakespeare Company production that I mentioned in my introduction, which I haven't actually seen, but I thought was really interesting because it's directed by Gregory Doran, and
I think we might have lost Lauren, or is it just me who's lost her, or maybe we've all lost her? Let's see if she comes back. Let's get Todd in the meantime.
Sure. So I think my favorite celebrity Shakespeare I saw was Jude Law's Hamlet. I took my students to go see it on Broadway when it transferred from Donmar Warehouse to New York City. And it was just such a cleverly done and brilliantly executed rendition of it when he gave the to be or not to be speech looking off stage right in the falling snow. I mean, you could hear the gasps in the audience, and my students coming out of that production were just so electrified, and just felt like we'd all lived through something really special. For As You Like It, I'm quite fond of the 2013 production at the RSC. That was sort of the Glastonbury As You Like It, where they set it at a summer music festival, and that just seems to really capture the vibes of the play. I find a modern equivalent to the kind of atmosphere that Shakespeare's conjuring in that particular comedy.
Brilliant, thank you. Let's hope Lauren can join us for the last bit. We're up for any more questions if there are any more.
We have an interesting one here. So is there any Shakespeare play that you feel can't be made to speak to a modern audience because it's so distant from our current experience?
I'm flipping through them all in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Taming of the Shrew is the hardest in some ways because of the gender politics. But that doesn't mean that somehow it's irrelevant.
Just say a bit more about that example. Do you mean if it speaks to our current world, it speaks in a very disturbing way about violence against women or something?
Yeah, maybe that's a better way to phrase it. Just the taming plot. A lot of readers take it at face value and are really quite appalled to see that. So blatant the blatant sexism and the violence and the abuse being made a subject of comedy. But if you read the play carefully, and if you look at the scholarship on the play, it's very clear in the comparison of the sources that Shakespeare is very much complicating that taming plot, and there are a lot of ironies and reversals in that play. So I suppose that would be the one that I think raises hackles on people's back most.
Yeah,
readily.
that's interesting. Lauren, we're just talking about another question, which is whether there are any plays by Shakespeare that can't be made to speak to our own time. Callan, did anything come to mind for you?
I don't know. I feel like The Willing is All, really, with how it's put on, and that so much has been projected or sort of manipulated with these plays, or simply just rewritten or adapted, that there's always a way around that, which is my way of avoiding answering that question, I guess.
Yeah, I agree with you, really. I mean, it's an interesting aspect of the history of Shakespeare, isn't it, that there have been plays which seemed not to find their place in the theatre until a very particular set of circumstances made them sort of unmissable. I think about Troilus and Cressida, which everyone seemed to say up to the sort of mid-century to the 1960s or something, what is this play about and why would we have it? And then, you have Korea and Vietnam, and suddenly everybody's thinking, oh yeah, this play about a war, we're not quite sure why we're in it, we don't know if we're the good guys or not, and it's all there's no heroics in it. That suddenly seemed very timely. Or I was thinking about Nick Heitner. Do you remember Nick Heitner doing Timon of Athens and making it into a great sort of parable of the financial crash and all that kind of stuff? So even these really difficult plays that have been a bit in the shadows, they can sometimes really just find their moment. Brilliant. I think we've got time for one more if we've got it.
Yeah, so maybe we could kind of round off on this one. What would you recommend, maybe of the books that we have, of the books that you're introducing currently? What would you recommend as the kind of order to read these books? Do you think there's kind of any best way that they interact with each other, or is it just kind of go for whichever one is your preference first?
My sense would be go for your preference. These are books designed. I was partly joking about collecting the whole library of them over the next few years, but there are collected editions of Shakespeare, and we are not doing that. We're doing individual plays which can stand on their own, along with other world's classics by other writers or other books that you're reading. So I would just go grab whichever seems interesting to you, or wherever you're going to the theatre. I wondered if the question was going to ask a version of, which is I always think of when I think of world's classics books in particular, do you read the text or the introduction first? If I had a world's classics Middlemarch or something, I would probably try and start Middlemarch, and then I would go back and read the introduction second. But I don't know, when you were writing, whether you imagined this is what people will first read, or this is what people will second read.
Which brings us a bit back to the first question about, what, I guess, trying to, hoping that our introduction should do both things, in that it can welcome you into the play, but also is a gloss on it, I suppose, which any introduction only ever is to the main affair, I suppose.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure Pardon?
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think in some ways, the order doesn't matter too much, but there are so many interconnections, I think, to be brought out as you read them. I mean, even in our discussion, I'm just thinking, I think, Callan, is it in Merry Wives that Falstaff invokes potatoes to kind of fall from the sky? So this tuber that's coming from South America, and Todd, even your discussion about enclosure and almost this kind of colonial mindset towards nature that we see coming even into Arcadia. So I think if you read a play like The Tempest, you might actually go back and read some of these other plays that aren't necessarily as directly interested in questions of kind of colonialism, and might still see those resonances. And similarly, some of these issues around women and ecology. I mean, I think there's so much to say about the environment in The Tempest. There's all these kind of interesting things that can be brought out, but you can kind of do that work regardless of the order that you read them in.
Yeah. So wherever you start, you're not going to finish there. That's probably where we ourselves will finish. But I will just say we are planning a monthly webinar, which is going to run for years, where we do a play a month. So keep looking out for where you spotted the advert for this event, and we'll have more details on that. I think to start at the beginning of next year. So if you want your New Year's resolution for 2025 to be to read more Shakespeare, come and do it with us. And more about that in due course. So let me say to Lauren Working, Callan Davis and Todd Borley, and to Luciano Flati and all the team at OUP World's Classics, who have been fantastic to work with. Thank you, and we've really enjoyed launching the series with you this evening. Thanks.
Thank you, Emma.
Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.